Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney podcast. I am your host, Nathan Chaney, and today we're going to talk about the data and science that goes behind supply chains and enables them to be efficient and effective. And we're talking with Raj today, who is a data analytics expert at Intel, and he's been kind of going from university to university, giving a presentation on the data science and design thinking that goes on behind the scenes in supply chain. So Raj, welcome to the show. And could you take a second to give us a little bit more of your background and story?
Thank you, Nathan. Great guy. Thanks for having me on this podcast. I am, like you mentioned, I work at Intel in data science. I've been in this field for almost a decade now. I read in 2012 or 2013, they said that data science is going to be the sexiest job of 21st century. And I
Uh,
thought I wanted to do a master's. And I realized, okay, there is only a handful of universities offered at that time. And today, every university has a course on data analytics. So I worked in pharma supply chain in during COVID time, and data and supply chain goes well together. And data supply chain is a data problem since time immortal. And today we have more data to analyze the problems within supply chain. So I accidentally got into supply chain. I'm fortunate that I found it. Bringing my data skills in supply chain, I can see tangible things happening in my day-to-day life, and I feel more clear. Like you mentioned, I do have a background in engineering and business analytics in my graduate school. I also am a big fan of anthropology. That's where my lot of my inspiration on problem solving using ethnographic methodologies, including design thinking, comes into the picture. That's what I'm very much passionate about, talking about it and how it can help in a very tech savvy problem. You still need people, and that's what my areas. And I have seen this in COVID supply chain, in pharma supply chain, as well as in semiconductor supply chain. You cannot take people out of a data problem.
sure. I've got a friend that's in the data side, like data collection, like RFID, barcodes, and all sort of stuff. And he says, don't throw technology at a people problem. And sometimes it's, don't throw people at a technology problem. And so you kind of need the right tool for the problem, I suppose.
That's exactly right. So the biggest factor within the design thinking is empathy. So whether you empathize with the peoples and their behaviors, or you empathize with the solution it's providing, plays a big role. The biggest role it plays is understanding your customer's needs. So I also heard someone say that a good enough solution built today is better than a perfect solution built 6 months from now. So with that mindset, if you approach all problems as people centric, your chances of getting success is more. I've seen this in my personal examples in my professional career at pharmaceutical supply chain, also in semiconductors. Most of the problems are thrown at one sentence ideas from the executive leaders. Okay, we need to solve this supply disruption. We need to find a way to allocate this single supplier limited scope product. How can we manage the allocation of a limited supply? So when you look at these problems, okay, let me go and search the system and get the data. But what are the behavioral changes you need to make with the people who are working, the buyers, planners, who are working and sourcing managers, commodity managers, to make a solution you build a reality? So that's why, like your friend mentioned, you need to understand the people first, whether at least we need to know, is it a people problem or not? Then you can go and solving the technology problem. So for me, understanding the people helped me navigate the change management. The companies I worked for all older than me, like 50 plus years, and they have their certain behaviors on things they do. So the earlier you understand these intricacies in their behavior, you are able to better frame the problem and prioritize what is possible. You could build a sophisticated solution like sending somebody to Mars and now think about overpopulation in Mars. If you don't have that problem at all at this point, so you need to understand where the people's behavior right now stays, then go about getting the data. in solving it.
I really appreciate, as
So
I've gotten to talk to you and learn a little bit about what you do and where your passion lies. I think there's a lot of it's really critical that this intersection of people and data exists. And I feel like so many people that I've talked to that I kind of see out in the industry kind of leave that empathy and that sort of ethnographic sort of perspective at the door a lot of times when they're talking about data and data driven decisions. And I feel like you have a really unique perspective. Can you talk a little bit more about what kind of inspired you to find yourself at this crossroads?
yeah, so I think I love to talk about it. Innovation is connecting the dots. We want to be knowing what is possible as inputs, and then we can inspire from different domains. So that's what happened to me in my personal life. I started as an engineer and worked in startups and doing everything from software development to project management to testing and marketing. So that gave me a really good exposure. And I got into, I've been always curious about cultures, so I like learning new languages. And in that process, I got really curious about cultural linguistics, and I started reading about linguistics, and that's how I enrolled in a local college on anthropology as a hobby to learn how I can understand more about it. And I really got inspirations from American anthropologists who have worked with various tribes in Polynesia. Polynesia is one of the favorite places I wanted to see their culture. And fast forward, I joined the school. Understanding data science is going to be a boom. I did my master's in 2015, actually. And when I got into the industry, the problems are not that straightforward. In 2015, I could just do a project in academy, like forecast the airline demand. It's such a clean data set. And when I get into the industry, this complex network of pharmaceutical stakeholders. So I realized how complex the real world can be. And then I've been taught about lean in my first job, and I've been a big fan of it since then. And I also realized lean also had a really good way to solve problems. Then I discovered through my mentor, who is a ethnographic PhD graduate from the Ohio State. He taught me about design thinking, and I realized I think I resonate with it because I learned this through my linguistics classes about ethnographics, and I was so surprised to see how an application of ethnographic humanities field comes into the picture for a business problem. Then I started reading about it through my mentor, and I understood, oh wow, I could really use it. And then COVID happens, and here it is. This is my use case. I'm going to just jump into what I learned over the years within anthropology to use in design thinking. So just a little bit of history of design thinking was started in design school, D school within Stanford, and it has like 5-step processes, starting with empathy, understanding the customer more in terms of defining the problem, ideating the problem, prototyping, and then testing. So it is a 5-step process, but the core of it lies in understanding the qualitative aspect. Because in school, what I learned, all of it is all quantitative techniques. And if I miss this qualitative aspects, I found it very challenging. And speaking of language and linguistics, there are key roles called as analytics translators. There was an article I read. They predict that it's going to be a specific job family called technology translators or analytic translators. So for you to be translating a business problem to a technology problem, you need to be looking at with a good empathy. Following that process really helps you to be a better translator. Speaking of my passion with language, in short, you need to be speaking the language of a business person and speaking the language of a technology person. So when you can speak these two languages, your success for the project goes.
Okay. So you've talked a little bit about design thinking. You kind of broke that down. How about, another word that you've kind of been using, which is ethnography or ethnographic or whatnot? Can you that's not, I think, a term that a lot of people use in their day-to-day life in supply chain. Can you kind of elaborate or kind of give us some tangible examples of where that comes in into your what you do?
Yeah, so ethnography is a branch of anthropology. It's systematic study of individuals and cultures, and it's more of understanding the cultural aspects in different tribes. But when it comes to the business world, it's within supply chain. If I have to relate to it, supply chain is a intricate network of people and processes. So it has a certain culture associated with it, and there is a journey associated with anything we do in supply chain. Whether you are in the manufacturing part, or a distributor, or a supplier, or the end customer, you are touching this some part of this chain, and you play a role, and you have a persona associated with it. You have a certain behavioral patterns associated with it. So when you look at this in a culture perspective, there is a beginning and there is an end. And if you look at, for example, in pharmaceutical supply chain, there are multiple stakeholders in the supply chain. There is manufacturers, there is distributors, there is pharmacy benefit management who works with insurance companies, there is providers networks, there is pharmacies, there is FDA, which regulates this. If you look at this, all of these agencies, not just purely as some entities, rather than as a culture of interaction between people, you get to know what is even possible. So when I was given a problem about supply disruption in pharma supply chain, I could think in different perspectives. And because I knew about the limited things I could do within this realm of pharma supply chain with all the regulations and the availability of data, I was able to quickly pivot what is possible and what data I have, what data is clean and reliable, available. So I usually prioritize a problem. Once I understand the people aspects, speaking of ethnographics, it's just understanding their culture and what data is available. Um, I'm I'm also aware of the privacy concerns. So you cannot make competitive pricing in pharma. So when you know such intricate details of what are the challenges, you're better able to prioritize your project. So the key things I use is the data readiness, the project's value, and the technique readiness. So if I'm able to prioritize a project with these three key metrics, I'm able to reach that. So going back to the ethnographic part, design thinking offers different tools and techniques. There is journey mapping, there is value chain analysis, there is storytelling, visualizations, mind mapping. These are all tools available in the design thinking toolbox, which actually helps you to do more qualitative research on that problem in hand before you jump into solution.
Gotcha. Could you kind of take what your experience has been, what the kind of projects you've been on, and tell a story or share a story of kind of like a real life example that people could relate to of where you were able to deploy, and utilize this design thinking and ethnography in a data, and combine it in with data analytics to come up with a solution or to make an improvement on something?
Yeah, I can speak for obviously everyone can relate to the pandemic. And during the pandemic, supply disruption has been an issue in pharma supply chain since time immortal, but COVID has worsened it. And people were in panic mode. And me, myself, we wanted to hoard the products. So I want everything for next 3 months. I don't know how long the pandemic is good. So I also went to a pharmacy and got like a bunch of Tylenols, which I really don't need. I don't know whether it solves the problem or not. And I got it. So similarly with the toilet paper issues, so people were in panic mode. Similarly, in this hoarding nature, just like what happens during hurricane season, people just goes to grocery and then try to get everything they could. So because of that, our whole forecasting system and the supply chain network coming from suppliers, manufacturing ingredients to distributors to customers all got disrupted. So we needed to find a way to manage this. Obviously, when I was given this problem, just like the executive leaders were, okay, we need to solve this problem. This is a big problem. And it was in one sentence idea. And when I looked at it, okay, I know this is a problem. We got a lot of data. We got some data that are qualitative. And how do I go about it? And that's where I realized, okay, I'm just trying to solve the world hunger, which I don't want to do it. And we have a limited time also. I mean, pharma industry, as much as you know, and supply chain is very complex. Healthcare is the complex thing in the US. I realized, okay, I need to take a step back and look at what is possible. So then I used design thinking methodology to go about, okay, let me write it down. I know this sounds like I feel like I know everything. I can just jump into solutioning, but let me write it down. So I created a project description. I wrote down who my customers are, what are the constraints, and I wrote down what's my exploration questions that I'm trying to answer, what's the research plan, what's my success metrics. And this is one of the toolbox within design thinking, by the way. So when you write it down and it made a big difference, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. And then I looked at journey mapping. So what's the customer want? So step one, it goes from customers to distributors, and from distributors, it goes back to customers. So when there is a disruption, especially in generic pharmaceuticals, we have an ability to substitute products. A product such as Tylenol has their generic versions too. So, but we buy Tylenol, it's a branded one, and there are cheaper versions available, and it's the same chemical component. So for me, I could look at this supply disruption into three different angles. What products are substitutable? How long is my product not available so that I can find a substitutable? And how much quantity do I need to find a substitutable product? So this, I was able to get to these three core problems. Oh, it is a substitution problem. If the supply is not there, I'm not going to get it anywhere. What I can do is with the limited supply, I need to be able to manage with substituting it. And still customers are able to get it. So I kind of think that as a before and after state, and I act as a translator in between. So the before state was an one sentence idea. I could go in different directions. I wasn't sure where. It's just like a lost, without a compass, lost in the middle of the ocean. And then when I actively engage these qualitative aspects and people's behavioral aspects and this design thinking toolbox, I get to translate this problem into what is possible within the limited time I have. And then I went about solving it, and it eventually became uh, a better forecasting and supply allocation methodology that helped to mitigate certain aspects of the disruptions that's caused during the pandemic.
Okay. All right. You mentioned a while ago about people going and buying all the Tylenol or all the toilet paper, and how that models and forecasts would have difficulty, I guess, projecting or forecasting that type of behavior would happen. It makes me reflect back to my consumer behavior class in my MBA, and understanding that in the US and in some countries, we're very individualistic in nature and how we think. And in other countries, are more collectivist, and they kind of look out for each other and don't take more than necessary for themselves because they are concerned about their neighbors and friends and that sort of thing. So is this, kind of like the phenomenon of what happened during COVID time, where people were just grabbing everything they could without necessarily thinking about the greater good? Did that differ from culture to culture, country to country, based on kind of the culture of that location?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I haven't taken a consumer behavior class, but I definitely can speak for it because I grew up in southern India, and the collective mindset that I grew up, and how during the pandemic, how people behaved. This is individualism in the US. So I think for your perspective, there is uh, a lot more centralized regulations in developing countries, which have more collective mindsets, and which also has ingrained in their culture. Like, so I grew up in a very joint family myself, and moving to the US was like a very different lifestyle for me. I have my own apartment, and like I have people all around me all my life until my move to the US, and here I am. I need to reach out to people. And speaking of individualism, the consumer behavior, obviously they have more say over how much they are buying, and what's accessibility and availability plays a big role in consumer supply chain. So it's not just the right product and the good quality product, when you have more accessible to something, just like any fast foods are more accessible. And although it may not be good for health, but you just go it's just available for you. And that makes a big role in individualized economies. And for back in developing countries, I noticed the consumers' behavior were handled differently. There is no this what's the word I'm looking for? There is no decentralized nature to deal with the pandemic. So there was all central authorities who managed the distribution of drugs, which made it difficult for people to even access it. And so they had to follow their own regulations. A lot of those regulations were set up at the federal level, not even at the state level. So people were not given that freedom to do that. And in a way, it helped. But on the other side, in the US, being in the individualistic realm, and the consumers had more say over their behavioral patterns on buying products. So that were it. It really led to a lot of disruptions within some critical products, and people are not able to get it. So even the pandemic was even it was not evenly distributed, because people who had more access to the vaccine were able to prevent it, and people who had access to preventive care, or even people who are in the affluent side, were less affected compared to the population which are not so.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. Could you talk a little bit about, we've talked a lot about data and data science and innovation and all this sort of stuff. And one topic I think that I ask every guest that comes on to speak to a little about is AI and how it's affecting their specific area or field of expertise in the supply chain. So I think we've gone through 25 minutes so far of this podcast without saying the word AI at all. So I'm curious what your thoughts are and how it plays into your.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought it. And in fact, I've been working on a couple of projects on AI. And you know what? AI is going to replace the jobs. That's what I thought. But that's not reality. But it is going to replace the job. People who use AI will replace people who don't use AI. AI machine learning has become, since the beginning of ChatGPT boom, people have started realizing it more tangibly in their day-to-day lives. And there was, before ChatGPT, there was still certain doubts for the common population, but now they realize it. Because of this, we need to start using AI in any role in the supply chain, planner, buyer, to a data science profession or an executive leader. If you don't use AI in your day-to-day life, you are missing out. Eventually, they are going to be replaced with people who use it. And it's applicable in different ways. So, for example, projects I'm working on is trying to automate the chatbot for the planning and buying team to understand what strategies they need to follow in finding a substitutable product. So it actually saves so much time for them to go back and see what happened 2 years ago in a substitution logic, or who is the supplier. So these informations are very much handy. If you don't use it, it would take 40, 50 hours for them to get to the same answer, but AI can give you the answer in like minutes. And that's amazingly incredible compared to what used to be. So I've been in pharma supply chain, and I've seen it grow over time. And I'm in semiconductors, which is also one of the national interest topics. AI boom is going to revolutionize supply chain in all aspects, including planning, demand forecasting, buying. And the other area I want to, speaking of AI, there is a recent funding as well to digital twins within supply chain. That's also becoming a big thing. And with AI combined with digital twins, there is a lot more to catch up and a lot more to capitalize. And I believe everyone should take um, a course related to AI to make them equipped to solve the challenging aspects within supply chain. Today's supply chain is very global, and we know that a disruption happening in any part of the world could affect the other parts. Data plays a key role, and hunting behind the data using manual processes on processing the data is no longer a solution other than implementing these AI-based solutions.
Yeah, I've had a number of folks from all sort of parts of the spectrum of AI, and I asked them the question, and for the most part, they describe it as being a tool, in the toolbox of a professional, and not necessarily replacing, but just making that professional more efficient at getting the data they need to make the decisions, and that at the end of the day, it's a suggestive tool to suggest here's inventory that may be at jeopardy due to something happening on the other side of the world, or here are some options for replacement vendors or suppliers, substitutes, like you were saying. But at the end of the day, it needs to still be, from what I'm hearing, right, is that it needs to be a human that ultimately clicks the purchase button or the change button to accept the suggestion that might be being proposed. Would you agree with that concept?
Absolutely. There is humanness, there is value that we bring in that AI cannot replace. But if you're still doing your job without getting assistance from AI, you're just wasting a lot of time and you're not being efficient. And that's where I mentioned people who use AI is going to replace people who don't. AI is in itself is not going to replace jobs, but rather it's going to make more productive work. So like you mentioned, it's going to assist you in every different aspects and you can automate certain parts of it, but eventually the core skills that you carry, that's where the emotional intelligence aspects, going to the ethnographic cultural intelligence aspects, these domain knowledge within supply chain, people's behavioral patterns, these are things that AI cannot understand, at least as of now. So when time comes, until then, this is how it is going to be, and this is just within the past 3-4 years, it has taken a big boom in the nature of work, and even the job descriptions I see recently. I've been doing a resume reviews for a university. I was just going through some job descriptions for them. How do they match the student's profile to the jobs they are looking for? A lot of these jobs are already asking, there is a requirement of knowing Gen AI and knowing AI, what it does, how they can do it productively. So yesterday I had a talk with Sinclair Community College in Ohio, and I was talking to the students, and one of the questions was about how AI is going to impact their jobs, because they are just very about, okay, will I get a job? So that's the same thing I told them, that you need to be equipped of what is available, and that's how the future of job market is going to be as well.
One of my very first episodes of my podcast was with Tom Clark, who's a supply chain recruiter. And is looking at resumes and job descriptions all day, every day, and asked him a little bit about this, and particularly the concept that you have AI on the hiring side of HR that is scrubbing through and filtering through hundreds or thousands of resumes and applications to filter down to the best candidates. And on the candidate side, you have the AI helping to improve the word choices and things in the cover letter and in the resume. And so I was painting this picture of, it's like it's my robot versus your robot, and they're battling, and somehow whoever has the best sort of intelligence in their AI will ultimately win. So, it's like spy versus spy, kind of what I see in my head. What do you see going down, 5-10 years from now? Any projections or any insights or, pro tips that you have for us, folks that are not in your corner of the industry?
Yeah, I think I'm not a soothsayer, but I believe the boom of AI is going to continue. I think there is potential for blockchains. Supply chain industry has huge potential because there is different entities working together. There is a huge trust mechanism that lies in the supply chain. I personally think blockchain will also be another revolution. I mean, it has been a lot with the cryptocurrencies, but I think within supply chain also there is few case studies that has been done already by some grocery supply chains. But I think The wider adoption is yet to come within blockchain, and obviously digital twins is, like I mentioned, is also a key area. So I think within these three things, if you are focusing your attention on either as if you are in schools trying to get a job in supply chain, or if you are already in supply chain trying to establish yourself or grow yourself, you cannot miss out on these three things. Yeah, that's what I think. So yeah.
I agree with you on blockchain. I've brought it up multiple times on a few episodes, and it's like it's there and it can help solve some of the big problems we have. Like on the freight and transportation side, there's a lot of folks that are fraudulently walking into a warehouse saying, "Hey, I'm here to pick up this load," or they're calling and interrupting the data flow and able to steal loads of cargo and impersonate others because there is not this like very controlled chain of data from one party to the next. It can be broken into easily, and I'm like, this is what blockchain is all about. This is what it's for. And it's like there's a number of problems in addition to pharma or grocery and the really good easy use cases where it could proliferate a little bit more. And so it's fun to talk about that because it's kind of like blockchain 10 years ago was like AI today, and it was like the hot new thing, and everyone was like, everyone's gonna jump on the bandwagon, and it kind of fizzled. So, but I'm an advocate for it still. So,
Yeah, yeah, good that
let's
you
keep
feel the
forward.
same way. Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, in 2016, 17, I remember there's a lot more talk about it when the Bitcoin boom, all the cryptocurrency boom. And when I realized, knowing about blockchain, I realized being in supply chain, I realized, oh, wow, this could be really helpful for supply chain. It's just forget about the cryptocurrencies and the trust factors, like you mentioned, on
Yeah,
data exchange is a big thing. And even simpler use cases you mentioned to a complex problem like the pharma industry with all the stakeholders sharing the data, all these entities is a huge potential. And like you said, I think it kind of faded away, but I also second you. There is huge potential on that, and it's yet to come.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for coming on today. Did we kind of cover everything that you wanted to try to kind of talk to today, or is there any stone we left unturned?
Nothing. I just want to thank you for having me and also want to appreciate the great work you are doing for the academy as well as for the industry. And I also been following you on LinkedIn, and you've been a great proponent on visiting all the trade shows, providing the key highlights. It's very informative, the things you are doing in the social media and for the upcoming generation of new graduates, and how helpful and inspiring it's for the supply chain. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate the support and look forward to kind of continuing to learn a little about what you're up to and the things that you're doing because I think it's really important.